Hello and welcome to the CSN3M Mindset Monday podcast. I'm Andrew Wade with Case Specific Nutrition. On this channel, we focus on the 3M's: mindsets, myth busting, and mentoring, all as they pertain to health and nutrition. This podcast is brought to you by the OptiLife Academy, Case Specific Nutrition's very own online do-it-yourself wellness course. Be sure to check out our free trial at optilifeacademy.com or by clicking the link in the show notes. You can use code Andrew at checkout for 10% off the entire course, which focuses on 20 modules of eating well and moving well so that you can get your habits into a place that you never thought possible. Today's episode, we're going to be discussing an interesting observation in the world of diets, and that is the similarities of the FODMAP diet and the Paleo diet. A couple weeks ago, I made reference to this subtly in one of the podcasts where I was discussing a couple key components on sort of the mindset and behaviors of setting finish lines. And I wanted to follow up on it because it really is an extremely valuable and interesting comparison. So to give a little bit of background, the FODMAP diet is a very, very common diet used in the dietitian world for irritable bowel syndrome. It was created back in the 2008, 2009 timeframe. Started to become popular in 2010. And FODMAP, it's FODMAP. It stands for fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. And so it's a lot to unpack, but basically what that means is those are all types of carbohydrate that some people struggle to absorb and digest properly. And so what ends up happening is they go into the gut and they don't get processed well. They go into the lower part of the gut and the bacteria in our gut ferment them, hence fermentable for the F in FODMAP. And that leads to a bunch of gas production and can lead to irritable bowel, gas, pain, bloating, all that kind of stuff. And so the FODMAP approach is basically a short-term removal of those items from the diet, particularly the carbohydrate part of wheat, which most people actually think are, they blame gluten, and in the FODMAP diet it does recommend going gluten-free, but it's not actually because of the gluten. The gluten is the protein. It's actually because of the fructans, which the fructan is the type of carbohydrate that's in wheat that a lot of people get bloated. So random side note, for those of you who have ever heard the term gluten intolerant, that is an absolute misnomer. So when our body rejects a protein, it's from an allergy, so we're allergic to it, or it's from an autoimmune response, which means our immune system responds to the protein and attacks it, and that's celiac. Gluten intolerance is saying that you don't tolerate that protein, but really what it is it tends to be more fructan intolerance, which is to say that your body does not actually process and break down fructans that are in wheat. The reason that we call it gluten intolerance is because gluten-free is already a common claim on foods. So if someone goes gluten-free, they are also removing fructans, which just makes it somewhat easier, I guess, for people to navigate. But the downside is it's caused gluten to be criminalized in a way that it really doesn't deserve to be. But that might be a longer topic and podcast for another day. What I was saying though is that the FODMAP diet removes wheat, it removes dairy, it removes certain types of fruits and vegetables, and then it also removes a lot of the legumes and then some other spices. And again, those are all ingredients that have some digestive tendency to be malabsorbed by humans and then sort of overly eaten by the bacteria, which leads to discomfort. And when you look at the FODMAP list, there are still plenty of fruits and veggies and lots of good foods that you can eat, but it definitely does give you a framework that you need to operate through. And the goal of the FODMAP is that you take a few weeks and eat those low FODMAP foods only, and then you slowly reintroduce some of the higher FODMAP foods that you personally enjoy the most or like the most to sort of assess how your body responds to it. And some people are have trouble with a lot of the different FODMAPs. Some of them only have issues with lactose or with fructans or with galactans or with sugar alcohols. And so it really does vary across the board, which is why IBS is such a vague symptom. If you've ever looked up irritable bowel syndrome and the foods that can trigger it, it's almost every food on the planet. And that's in part because different people get irritated by different things. The FODMAP diet seeks to understand that. And the goal of it is then once we better understand what bothers you, we can then discuss what's the likely or, what's the feasibility of actually, excluding those from the diet. And then also ways we can incorporate it to minimize the negative effect, the bloat, the discomfort, the pain, sometimes digestive enzymes, sometimes probiotics, particularly if it's fructans. And then sometimes it can even be just the moderation or what it's paired with or how many FODMAP foods exist in the day. And so all in all, the goal of the FODMAP diet is pretty pure in the world of improving digestion, removing discomfort. And some people, when they do the FODMAP diet, are in a debilitating amount of pain. I mean, they're taking time off work because they're in so much pain and have so much pressure. And so it can really, really change people's lives. And what's fascinating is fairly recently, I was reading Rob Wolf, who's kind of the father of the paleo diet, his most recent book called Wired to Eat. And very interesting book. I was reading it more to play, sort of like as an antagonist. The paleo diet has a lot of sort of negative connotations with it. And one of the things that's very obvious to me is that when you look at what the paleo diet actually is removing, it's removing all the same things as the FODMAP diet. It literally removes wheat, and it removes dairy, and it removes beans, and then it removes certain vegetables, and then gives sort of freedom to go from there. And when you look at the list of what's removed, they are actually identical. And what's really fascinating is the paleo diet really first came out in around 2010 as well. So the FODMAP diet and the paleo diet both emerged in very similar time frame. And the paleo diet went and became this weight loss fad and this craze of sort of the diet world, where the FODMAP diet became this medical intervention. And what's weird is they have literally the same framework. And so I sought to understand sort of where the author of the paleo diet books was coming from, just because it seemed more and more to me like people were just so extreme about it, right? They were getting to the point where when they went paleo, they perceived other foods as bad for them, as opposed to maybe just not digesting well. They didn't have the right why, which is really where I want to go with this podcast, is understanding the why behind your diet choices. And to my surprise, as I read through Rob Wolf's books, I found that he actually started doing the paleo style eating because he had ulcerative colitis. And in having ulcerative colitis, which is an irritable bowel disease, he was seeking to understand what was bothering his gut. And he started to remove certain foods and then add them back. And over time, he developed his diet that allowed him to come off of his medications and allowed him to manage his ulcerative colitis with diet alone. And that is actually what the paleo diet was. And what was extremely fascinating to me is in his book, he's extremely angry that the paleo diet has become this extremist view, but because in his view, it's the baseline plan that allows his digestive tract to stay in tune, allows him to feel his best, and then he enjoys exceptions, things like wheat, things like beans, even some dairy, when it's a worthwhile occasion or a special occasion. And he knows physically that food's probably going to irritate him, which is why he doesn't do it all the time, but he does it, as a special circumstance. Which is really a much healthier relationship with food than I expected to hear as I read through the book. It surprised me in certain ways. And there were definitely some extremist, more like weight loss focused and more diet focused comments. But all in all, the framework, what fascinated me was the basis of that diet was exactly that of the FODMAP. They both are diets that are attempting to improve and reduce inflammation, bloat, and discomfort, as well as better understand what someone is eating that's bothering them, and then ways they can eat it so that it doesn't physically bother them. But the biggest distinction between the two is the clarity of the why. And this is where case-specific nutrition comes into play. This is what we do as a team week in and week out, is we help our patients find their why, right? When they sit down in our office to try and make changes to their life or to their eating, we want to help them more clearly see why they want to do that. What's the goal behind it? What's the ambition? What's the perceived reward? And then move forward with it. And it's neat because a FODMAP diet, when someone comes in and has digestive issues, that's the most likely approach. When someone comes in and they ask about a paleo diet approach, it becomes this immediate question of what is the goal here? And more often than not, the comment is the goal is weight loss, or the goal is something to the extent of losing body fat. And what's very fascinating to see is the difference in the why there is the difference in the sustainability of it. Those who do the FODMAP diet tend to really enjoy it. They start to cook with, ingredients that are FODMAP friendly. They start to make sauces. They start to test things out. They start to navigate restaurants, and it becomes this really positive thing. And the reason for that is because there's a real why. There's something that they can see and feel and measure in real time. Where when someone goes on a paleo diet, if they're going on that paleo diet with the goal of just pure weight loss, that ends up being a very hollow goal, right? There's no immediate reward of that. There's no, attention to what actually benefits. And even if the person went on a paleo diet to lose weight and they started digesting better and energy levels stabilized and all those things, the weight loss is the thing that's on the front of their mind. And so if the weight loss doesn't happen the way they wanted it to, they might stop doing it despite all of those other good things. And this goes back to podcasts that we've discussed and we've had here on the past where we look at, is the scale the best measure of your health? Is the scale the only measure that we should be using? And more importantly, is the scale distracting you from the metrics that actually matter? And what's fascinating is in the world of a paleo diet, it is probably one of the main reasons why the paleo diet has a negative connotation. The diet itself is extraordinarily similar to a very well-known, very well-received, very highly researched, sought-after medical intervention, but because it has this weight loss tie to it, people immediately think it's rigid, think it's restrictive, and it's because of the why. Why are people doing it? Are they doing it because they're interested in how to feel better, or are they doing it because they're chasing some arbitrary number to try and force the scale down in a massive and creative way? And so what I would encourage as sort of the takeaway for this is any dietary interventions you're contemplating or thinking about, make sure you understand your why. And then from there, make sure you take a look at those interventions and make sure they align with the why. Because to be honest, if I have somebody that approaches me and says, I have noticed that when I eat dairy, I have more acne, because some people do. And so I'm removing that because I don't want to have acne, it's uncomfortable and it hurts my back, or I noticed that when I eat wheat I'm gassy and bloated and distended and I feel uncomfortable and I get kind of sluggish. Well, those are all really, really great reasons to play around with trying to better understand what's going on with the gut. And again, they're also going to be reasons that you as an individual are going to be able to own because they have a good why behind them. When you're at the holiday cookout or the barbecue or whatever it is, and those foods are in front of you, if you're avoiding them because it's quote unquote not on your diet and you can't, that is obviously a very negative and separatist notion that is also really hard because you're relying on willpower. If instead you chose to abstain or skip out or minimize certain foods because when you eat them you don't feel great, that is an easier thing to remember and stay in tune with. And also it'll allow you to have a less restrictive, less rigid conversation with yourself, and potentially also avoid and remove those feelings of guilt, because that's really where the diet mindset can harbor a lot of guilt in our choices, right? Oh, I can't believe I ate that. It's not on my diet. Well, why isn't it on your diet? Because I don't digest well and I feel bloated. Okay, well then do you feel bloated and uncomfortable? And if so, let's eat some normal meals and get the body back into rhythm. And so I hope you can hear the distinction there, where we can end up having a much more positive mindset about food, a much more understanding of our choices. And instead of avoiding foods because we're told to, we can instead navigate food based on how it makes us feel and how it supports us and our health and our wellness. So to all of you, those of you out there that have thought that the paleo diet was this terrible negative thing, it's worth at least noting that at base the concepts are founded in a place that are trying to support understanding of self, The problem is how it's evolved in our diet culture and how it's marketed and how it's fed sort of this weight loss focused culture that then creates this negative relationship with food where this is good and this is bad, instead of, for me personally, these foods digest well and give me energy, while these foods make me a little bit sluggish or make me feel a little bit gassy and bloated. That is a much more clear understanding of self, and utilizing a dietary approach to understand yourself is absolutely a great thing. I would encourage that if you're going to do so, you work with someone who genuinely understands this big picture mindset. A lot of health coaches and quote unquote weight loss coaches are not going to fully understand the why behind a lot of the interventions or suggested protocols. And if you're working with someone who's making you feel or think or develop this idea or notion that certain foods are bad, then you need to really reconsider who you're working with, because the goal is not to label things as good or bad, but instead better understand what they mean for you and how they feel for you so that you can feel your best. I hope this has been some interesting insights and, like I said, a unique observation in the world of diets, that are prescribed out there very commonly, day to day. I'd like to thank you again, as always, for listening to our podcast. Please subscribe to our channel and share on your favorite social media, hashtagging Spread the Health. Don't forget to tag a friend or loved one who would benefit from hearing this. For more case-specific nutrition content, follow us on social media at Case Specific Nutrition and check out our website, casespecificnutrition.com. We will be back next week with another CSN3M Mindset Monday.